for the room change, but that happens. I'm Bob Jordan, Vice President of USA Institute, and we're delighted to be working with the U.S. Congress China Working Group on the Senate side with Senator Dan Sullivan and Major Hirono, and on the House side from Rick Larson and Darren O'Hood. And we're delighted to be working with some of our old colleagues, Sarah Sabag, Adam Changa, Ashley Stewart, and Liz Benicki. I'll now turn the program over to Margaux Fimbres, who's a policy advisor for the Asia section of the Department of Energy, and she will introduce our speaker, and we're off and running.
Okay. Well, my name is Margaux Fimbres. I'm a policy advisor at the U.S. Department of Energy's International Affairs Office, and I'll be your seminar moderator today. Today's seminar covers China's energy and environment, which are hot topics in China, but also globally. And I'm pleased to introduce this session's presenter, Dr. Jennifer Turner. Dr. Turner has been the director of the China Environment Forum at the Woodrow Wilson Center for 18 years now. And she creates meetings, exchanges, and publications focusing on a variety of energy and environmental challenges facing China. She also leads the Wilson Center's Global Choke Point Initiative, which together with Circle of Blue has produced multimedia reports, films, and convening on water, energy, food confrontations in China and other countries. Dr. Turner also serves as the editor of the Wilson Center's journal, the China Environment Series, and most recently co-authored China's Water, Energy, Food Roadmap. She received a PhD in public policy and comparative politics from Indiana University, Bloomington, and I've had the pleasure of hearing a couple of these lectures before from Dr. Turner, and I can tell you that they are amazing, and she really is Jennifer. You're really getting the best person to brief you on.
All right, hey, all right. So shall we go? Response. Come on, let's get some enthusiasm come up here. I used to be a kindergarten teacher in Taiwan, so I kind of, if I can get at least half the enthusiasm from you guys, I'll be happy. So today I'm going to talk to you, one of the projects we've done for many years, kind of both formally and informally, is called Cooperative Competitors. That's looked at U.S.-China clean energy cooperation. So I kind of stole that title to kind of do cast a broader net on U.S.-China cooperation on energy and environment. So just to introduce me something that you didn't talk about, I used to live in 1987 as an English teacher in Hunan province, the little blue one there. It's known for its chili peppers. Anyone been to Hunan? Yes? Awesome. 1987 in Changsha. And so that was my beginning in China, where I was exposed to the beginnings of air pollution. Today we talk about particulate matter 2.5. Back then it was particulate matter. I don't know what. There were huge hunks of coal floating through the air. So I was teaching at the Chinese Non-Ferrous Metals University in Changsha. And it was only when I came to the Wilson Center that I started thinking, Non-Ferrous Metals Corporation, a lot of smelting, a lot of mining. So in Hunan province, a lot of the rivers are contaminated by mining and a lot of industry that processes metals. And I'm going to ask, I know this is a simple question. Does anyone here have an iPhone or a BlackBerry? Raise your hand. All right, 100% of your glass screens for these are made in Changsha, in Hunan province. And a lot of other metals that are probably inside our various devices are made there. And I'm starting off differently. I know you expected me to probably talk about pollution and energy, but I want to start with water first, because I think it's important. And when last year I was able to host a guy from an NGO called Green Hunan. And it's a unique grassroots group that has created a system of river walkers, they call them. And they're basically citizen scientists who they go out and they walk the rivers around Changsha, and they take samples, they take photos, and they've become an early warning system for the provincial and city environmental protection bureaus. You may know that their EPA version has often been very underfunded, understaffed, and cut off at the knees. And so what's been great is that with this NGO activating the citizen base, they've really been able to find out, their limited resources of staff can go out and enforce where there's water pollution. This gentleman here, he actually, Wei Song, became their most prolific river walker. In fact, that in this one area that he worked in, is called in Shangtang, he did lots and lots of measurements, and they were done so well that it actually kind of stood up in court, and a couple of years it got cleaned up. He was so proud of his work that when he got married, he took his wedding photo in front of where he helped clean it up. And the Green Hunan folks, they were actually recognized in 2013 by China Central Television as Person of the Year in terms of promoting rule of law. I mean, I toss this story out here because it's not necessarily the one that's expected about what's coming out of China, a good news story of pollution control. Now, I just heard from Green Hunan that Alibaba, please tell me you know Alibaba, right? The Jack Ma of Alibaba, that he actually has given a grant to Green Hunan and some other NGOs to take this River Walker program and make it nationwide. Because China has a big problem with information transparency, data collection, and in addition to this, he's also been kind of lighting a fire under his customer base. I call them the 500 million strong army, selling inexpensive water testing kits to the citizens. So this is kind of just a different way of thinking about China's environmental problems. Now, the water issue, I think, we're going to talk about air and energy in a second, but just the numbers here. I don't like slides with words, but here's some important words. 30 to 50% of China's rivers and groundwater are polluted to such a level that they are untouchable. World's most populated country. Do you think it's touched? Do you think it's used? Oh yeah. And so, but 300 million people in China don't have access to clean water. Now here's a question for you guys. What is the #1 source of water pollution in China? And you can't answer because you know. Used to be human waste, but with the Olympics they started installing wastewater treatment plants, so now something like 80% of the human poop is treated. But agriculture. In fact, this is my most successful infographic. Too many details for you, but this is, the agricultural sector is the #1 polluter of water in China, right? You're feeding a lot of people, using a lot of pesticides and fertilizers, and as China has become more wealthy, they're eating more meat. Per capita, it's still much less than us, but you know, in China, 1.3 billion times anything is a whole hell of a lot, right? And so there's a big challenge of animal waste going to the rivers. And before I switch to energy, making you think about like why should we as people in the United States really care about China's water quality? Well, Friday night fish fries is one reason. Like 73% of the tilapia that's sold in the United States comes from China, from aquaculture. China's the #1 exporter of fish. They catch a lot out in the oceans, but also more and more in aquaculture. And as a side note, we've actually hosted one of China's leading activists on aquaculture, and she's working with Disney and other companies to try to work on greening the supply chain with aquaculture. I was like leaving like little hints that all is not lost. So let's get to air. Because you guys all know, now who's been to China? Show of hands. So you all know that the air quality, when were you last there?
2012.
Okay, so it wasn't great then?
I was actually there right after Leon Panetta's visit, when they do whatever they do to make the weather better very briefly. But like a few days after that happens, it is horrible. Yeah. So it was actually pretty bad.
Yeah, so, I mean, in China, something like 1.2 million people die early every year because of respiratory illness linked to air pollution. And so, kind of a low softball toss here. But you guys tell me, where do you think all this smog is coming from? It's blanketing these cities and then rendering them invisible. Main source of air pollution? Coal. I mean, so coal, China, I mean, for many years, like 80% of their electricity came from coal. It's now down in the mid-60s. Do you want to give me the confirmation here? But so yeah, I mean, China is, you know, their economy has been growing. They're the world's factory. Their economy has been, GDP has been growing somewhere between 7 and 10% for 40 years. And, you know, they use lots and lots of coal. And that has been decreasing. I'll give you the numbers of those shortly. But another reason why the air pollution is so bad is that here is a Chinese idiom for you. 天高皇帝远, that the emperor is far away from the people actually on the ground. Deng Xiaoping, when he started China's reforms back in the 1980s, he decentralized power. Local governments have been given a lot of muscle in China. And they were ordered back in 1980, make us rich, and we can all safely say that that their economy has grown. And so the reward system for local governments for years and years has just been the GDP. That has started to shift in the last couple of years with the pollution getting worse, But it's ultimately, the easiest way for, I think, Americans to understand, they became a federal system with absolutely no checks and balances. And now we're trying to correct that. And we are seeing a lot of progress on that front. Another source of the pollution is just the fact, to give you a sense of scale of the sheer growth, let's look at urbanization. Back in 2007, this was the subway in Beijing. This is the subway today with 17 lines. This is the subway in another 3 years, which will be 25, 26. And so what do you need to build subways, ladies and gentlemen? Steel, cement, energy. And so this is just, I feel like this is the footprint of the city. Imagine on top of this, Beijing, a city of 21 million people, now has 7 ring roads. Someday there will be a ring road around Moscow. But that also needs cement, steel to make the bars on the side of the roads, and then all the cars and all the buildings. So the urbanization, which is really making China, strong. I don't know which one thing about. Anyway, so building the country, their strategy, the government strategy has been urbanization, and that takes a lot of electricity and a lot of power. Now, as you just mentioned a moment ago that you were there in 2012 where the air pollution got really bad. Well, that was the beginning of the government, the leadership declaring a war on pollution. They took a little lingo out of our playbook, right? They have a war on pollution now. And so they've had pollution action plans. They've revised their energy law. They now have stricter penalties for local governments that you may lose your development resources. And it's been really fascinating to see that they're getting more teeth. But the other issue, too, that's gone parallel with this growth in coal is that China is the #1 investor in clean energy in the world. They started beating us out about 6 years ago, I think, in the investment. Do you agree? I'm not trying to make you feel bad, me, but all right. So China's the #1 producer of wind and solar. And just to give you a sense, what everyone's always concerned about is, come on, clicker, jobs. That in China, you can see the stats that, again, I don't like word stats, but this is one of our infographics we have online that, that they can have up to 13 million people working in the renewable energy sector. So you see solar and wind kind of big in China. But one of the challenges is that they're building out these giant wind farms out in North China where there's a lot of desert, a lot of wind, a lot of solar. And the challenge is getting that stuff on grids. There's also been a problem, remember my muscle man of the provinces? Well, in the past year, they've had a problem, even though that coal-fired power plants, a lot of them have been shut down, mines have been shut down. We still are seeing some provinces, like Anhui province, saying, we don't want your wind, Inner Mongolia, because we want to build our coal-fired power plant. It's kind of an issue that they can't charge fees and taxes on the electricity coming from outside the province, but they can inside, right? And they also, coal is also, it's kind of what China knows. But so there's been this is the amount kind of, I call it garbage wind, that nationally 17% of the wind is not getting on grid, and in Gansu province it got as high as 43%. Kind of a challenge. But, okay. Another thing that the Chinese government did was working very actively with particularly the Obama administration on clean energy cooperation, and we had the climate agreement. But before I shift into because I now want to shift into talking about U.S.-China energy and environmental relationship, I wanted to check first, do you guys have any general questions about that quick and dirty overview of China's environmental problems? Just checking. You guys get that lady. All right.
Can I ask one question? So I want to talk about public perception in China on some of these issues because on air pollution issues, I think the Chinese average person deeply cares about the quality of their air and water.
Yeah.
When it comes to issues like climate change, is it, my understanding is that has not been, they don't really care that much, and it's, that might be changing slowly, but really the priority is on cleaning up water and
yeah, I mean, pollution is the #1, taking care of pollution is the #1 priority because people are getting sick. They also see that, investment in some provinces has gone down because the quality is so bad. That said, China has been suffering a lot from, more droughts, more rain, and the Chinese government, well before the federal government here was, the past administrations were admitting it, particularly under G.W. Bush, that, back under actually G.W. Bush, they started talking about how climate change is going to severely constrain our development. And so you had it from the top down talking about it, but we also have that the NGO community, and I'm very well linked into it, both the Chinese, and there are lots of US NGOs that are operating in China working on climate. I think there is an appreciation, and they see the linkage. I mean, the fact that also, I mean, Xi Jinping, I mean, when he signed the climate agreement with the US, I mean, he did that. It's very much, it's his legacy.
Right.
I mean, and that's so different for China to actually thinking that a global agreement is going to be part of their legacy. But so that people, I mean, they are smart. I mean, I often say that you can also kind of tell like what the public understanding is on environmental issues in China by talking to your taxi driver. Like when I was first in China, and also when I started working at the Wilson Center, I go to Beijing, and it would just total smog, and I'd be talking to him about, well, the pollution's bad. And he'd say, no, it's smog, it's fog. I'm like, it was like a different tone. One was ooh, and one was ooh, we're going ooh, arguing about it. And today you get in a taxi, and they will wax poetic about low carbon development. And then, but also even saying sometimes, my taxi driver is saying that, and China, that there's this sense of this pride that, we're working with the U.S. on climate issues. So it's really intriguing that the awareness, is there. But again, ultimately, there's still the pollution in your face issue, which was, I would argue, one of the main motivators for Xi Jinping to sign. Yes?
In looking at coal, have they made any efforts to implement the environmental technology necessary to burn coal in a more cleaner fashion? Or talk to us about the technological gaps?
Well, there's actually, I'm going to give you a little advertisement at the end. We're actually, one of our speakers at a meeting next month is from the Center for American Progress, and they just did a report called What You Don't Know About Chinese Coal. And actually China has the largest fleet of ultra supercritical coal-fired power plants, which means that they're air-cooled, they are so efficient. I mean, it's like 40% more efficient. And the standards that are being passed in China for their coal-fired power plants, so if you look at their top 100 efficient plants, I mean, it's way above what we have. And if you look at the top 100 efficient plants in the United States, they would not be allowed in China. China now has more efficient coal burning technology than we do. That said, it's because also our technology is old, right? I mean, we're retiring coal-fired power plants, yes?
Yes. And I would just add, maybe you could talk about it later, that the old fleet in China, they're exporting to other places in Southeast Asia and around the globe too. So those plants are not using the high.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes, there are times where they actually dismantle them and send them, but it's also that's the flip side of China and its climate leadership, is that you've got to heard the Belt and Road, this this investment strategy in China to just build lots of infrastructure around the globe. In the energy sphere, 80% of the investment is coal-fired power plants. But you have to keep in mind, it's also sometimes what the host countries want. But there's some interest. There's going to be another report I know coming out from CAP relatively soon that's going to be looking. They've gone out and they've done interviews in Indonesia, Malaysia, and these other countries where they would actually like to have the cleaner technologies. But that said, it's more expensive. But yeah, I mean, Pakistan, huge agreement. There was like recently three big coal-fired power plants. One's happening, two in process. So yeah, I mean, but again, it's what, China knows this. And it's also employment, jobs there. They're sending some of their jobs overseas. Does that answer your question? Okay. Any other quick questions? Don't be shy. All right, so yeah.
So you say that they're much cleaner than the U.S. Is the reason then that you can't see the sun in China just because there's so many more? Is that the reason?
Yeah. I mean, it's just, again, keep in mind that China's coal fleet is, 50% of the world's coal fleet in terms of coal-fired power plants. So, but the top 100, top 200 are these super clean ones, but then there's hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands more that aren't as clean. And the ones that aren't as clean, sometimes, there hasn't been incentives to put on the scrubbers. But what's one thing I should make a side note, I do lots of meetings, and the US EPA Air Office for years has worked with China, helping them do regional air quality planning, kind of being a matchmaker. Do we have any Californians here? Right, the California Air Resources Board, the US EPA has been partnerships with their Chinese counterparts to try to have this kind of regional planning on air pollution. EPA's done a lot of health. Early on, back in the 90s when I first started, they did a lot of health and energy studies. And so, so we've actually, and I'm getting into this part of my presentation now, how the US government, NGOs, think tanks, we've done a lot to help build the capacity and understanding in China about how to become cleaner and greener. And see, so my slide here, there's another Chinese Chengyu. Did anyone speak Chinese here, by the way? At least you're learning some Chinese expressions. There's an expression that's just used, that's called same bed, different dreams, that I think applies really well to the US and China, not just in environment, right? We're the two biggest economies in the world, and in terms of energy, the largest producers and consumers. And so, we're linked at so many levels. Global security, right? But as this Chengyu implies, is that while we're stuck together, we have different visions of the world. But what's been really fascinating for me, as my front row seat of working at the Wilson Center, and I work with US and Chinese government, NGO, business, and researchers, is how they really have come together, with the same dream, particularly around climate and clean energy. Come on, baby. And just super brief through this, because I don't know how familiar you all are, but that the US and China started working together on energy and environmental issues because of the 1979 S&T agreement. My first publication was called Crouching Suspicions, Hidden Potential, US-China Energy Environmental Cooperation, that talked about how, and it's something that I'd like to argue with you today, is that the cooperation that we see between the two countries on energy and environmental issues, it's built up some good relationship in a bilateral relationship that's not always good and conflict-free. And it's really built up in this area, kind of trust, regular communications. Here's a question: how many times have you gone to China?
Once this year. I'm about to go again in a couple weeks, and a couple more times later this
But
year.
last year?
3 times.
And the year before?
I was not at the
Oh, that she was. So just to also again skipping with over history stuff. That 11 years before Al Gore made his film An Inconvenient Truth, he actually created something called the U.S.-China Forum on Environment and Development, which was the first time that it was all about climate change and energy, really. But the first time that the two countries came together at a high level and said, this is important. And now, no money was allocated for this work from the US side, but it still moved cooperation forward. And a lot of times we've seen how the Chinese actually are willing to fly themselves over to learn from the DOE, the EPA, USDA, et cetera. So here's like a little summary, giving you a quick view. Between 2001 and 2008, if we're talking about climate issues under the Bush administration, there was a lot of finger pointing, right? The failure of the climate talks then, and the US and China were each other's best excuse not to sign on to the global climate agreement, all right? And then somehow, in 2009, Obama and Hu signed these clean energy agreements. And suddenly there was a lot going on. And so I've had people coming to me after this happened, they're like, how did this happen? And I said, well, and there's way too many for you to read, but these lists is not complete. A lot of US foundations, Energy Foundation, Climate Works, Rockefeller Brother Fund, Blue Moon Fund, have supported NGOs, universities, think tanks like me, to engage with China on clean energy and environmental issues. A lot of capacity building. The Energy Foundation, which is started in San Francisco, actually has an office in Beijing. They have one in Delhi and Rio as well. But their Beijing office was their first international office. And so a lot of US energy NGOs and researchers sometimes kind of have their offices there. And so we've really, if you look at, I talked about China's #1 in renewables. They actually have an energy law that they revised recently. They have clean air law. They actually have a clear energy policy. Not saying it's always implemented, but if you look at these laws on the energy side, on the environmental side, I know their fingerprints of a lot of US NGOs and researchers are on them. And so what we saw after the Obama-Hu clean energy agreements, this kind of clean energy and climate ping pong, lots of meetings going back and forth. And in 2013, did you guys hear about the climate change working group that was created over at State? Hear about it? It's gone now. But they were really instrumental in taking these clean energy, there were all these forums, there were these projects and pilots, and they really started pushing harder on China doing something on climate. And so that's why, so this is kind of like the making of the sausage of how we got the US-China climate agreement and what led to Paris. They're also under the Obama administration time period, they created mechanisms that don't have to depend on who's elected. Longer term things that, there are these clean energy research centers. Do you work on that?
Yes, our office does, and also the climate change working group. There is still some activity that is moving forward,
Okay.
and the CERC also is moving forward.
Yeah, so the CERC, and what's lovely about this is not just bilateral cooperation. This was not that much money, from what I said, from both the U.S. and Chinese side that's awarded. There are NGOs, businesses. A lot of them are U.S. national labs on the U.S. side. The Chinese counterparts, they're coming together to do joint clean energy technology research and also look at the policies that make that technology work. And the goal is that it's supposed to be mutually beneficial, right? China's really the laboratory for experimentation on a lot of clean energy technologies, different ways of managing clean energy. And so there are a lot of US companies that see the benefit of participating in this kind of, I guess you kind of public-private partnership. I hate that. They got the NGOs too.
Right.
Do I do an adequate job?
Yes.
And the DOE is the point agency on it. So 10-year framework, that's also under the State Department. So trying to plan, again, not just for energy and environment, this also includes illegal wildlife trade, which has also been kind of a successful area of cooperation. You guys, do you hear the stories about the elephant horn burnings, right? Did you hear about that?
Yeah, in Kenya.
Yeah, so the U.S. burnt like 60 tons, and the next day China burnt 61 tons. Cooperative competitors. They got to do us one better sometimes. There's also something was catalyzed under the climate discussions. The Climate Change Working Group kind of got a lot of U.S. cities on board to create what's called a U.S.-China Climate Leaders Summit. First one was in LA 3 years ago. And so it's really kind of exciting because, as you guys know, in the U.S., really, our cities and states they're on the front lines of dealing with energy and climate issues, and really the innovators. And so this basically is kind of like the e-harmony for U.S. and Chinese cities to work together on low carbon and clean energy issues. So there was one in Boston and LA, Beijing, and there's going to be one in Boston, I'm hoping.
That's a little bit up in the air right now.
Breaking my heart. But even without that, you guys heard of California besides the California? Yeah. The California, Jerry Brown was just in China. That didn't just come out of nowhere. I mean, starting under Arnold Schwarzenegger, they've had MOUs with China. I mean, I love it. Like state of California, we're signing an MOU with you to work on climate and energy issues. And they're going there. They say it's big business. This is bringing California technology and innovation to China. Because it's all for environment as well, but there's definitely a business argument. There's also a green port partnership that the EPA has been leading. I brought some Chinese green port folks to the U.S. last summer, and I got to go out to the port of LA, and I learned to speak port. But how our ports are also struggling with trying to become cleaner and greener and low carbon, and LA has had a 10-year partnership with the port of Shanghai, the world's largest port. And because I went, and I asked all these port officials that, in various cities in the United States, and they say we love working with China because they just experiment and they try new things and we learn from them. So it's just kind of interesting. There's still obviously bumps in the road when we're talking about U.S.-China, clean energy or climate cooperation. In terms of the Chinese companies, there have been challenges when clean energy companies trying to come to the U.S. and invest with the CFIUS mechanism. IPR questions, but that said, remember the clean energy research centers that DOE is leading? What's unique about those 5 centers that I mentioned? They've created agreements for joint IPR development. And the Chinese have now discovered, as they've become more of a leader in the world on IPR, that they've discovered that some of their own, like Chinese government supports a company doing some clean energy like on wind. And then they find out that we funded this, and then another Chinese company has stolen the technology. So the Chinese government has kind of finally gotten on board that IPR matters, even for their own economy. I think the solar panel dumping dispute has kind of drifted a little bit lower, but then there's the Paris exit. What that means for, I think definitely I could say this fairly comfortably that on the bilateral gov to gov level, it seems that we're kind of entering a cooling off period of working with China on these issues, because the Trump administration doesn't appear to be as enthusiastic about it. But the Chinese are turning to the Europeans and California, and even India is interested in working with China on climate and clean energy. So, but we can talk about the Q&A, but whether or not China can be the leader on climate. I mean, China was the leader on climate with the U.S. Because remember, same bed, different dreams, same bed, same dream. I think that together, again, the U.S. and China kind of, on the climate front, really pushed each other to do good things. So, you know, if you're interested in climate. And also I note that, you know, there's been decrease in funding and staffing on some of the U.S. international cooperation on climate and environment. So that also could be a bit of an obstacle if you're interested in that area. CAP has got this one map, and there's others I can direct you to talking about Chinese direct investment in the clean energy economy. China is still interested, and we are seeing some, you know, more movement there. And my last slide is just to tell you, again, I just want to give you enough information to make you dangerous for the last half hour. That I could talk a lot more about US NGOs that are working in China on energy and climate. One of them is the Natural Resources Defense Council. They've done a lot on the coal cap program. They were the ones that actually got the Chinese to talk about capping coal. But this is, I threw this example up because they have a project called Clean by Design, which is trying to create low-cost, no-cost strategies in textile manufacturing. China makes about 50% of the world's textiles. I'd venture to say that a good portion of the clothes that we are all wearing today probably started somewhere in China. But that highly polluting and highly energy-intensive industry if it's not managed well. And so NRDC has partnered with these and other companies to try to green that supply chain. And that's one of the trends that I've kind of seen over my years at working at the Wilson Center, that it's the NGOs, the US government, partnering a lot more with US companies, because US companies and their shareholders kind of see that what's happening in China in terms of their environment and energy problems as a risk to their bottom line and their reputation. So that's where I'm going to, my shameless advertising, that on July 12th, we're going to have someone from CAP, the International Institute for Sustainable Development, and a woman from the, I have to get it right, Kentuckians for a Clean Energy Transition coming to talk. So if you guys, we also, I shouldn't say this because you'll never come then, we do live webcast it. So if you can't come and enjoy our mediocre coffee and croissants, you can watch us online if you're interested in this topic. And I have my last slide that shows you like how to contact us. But yeah, so that's, have I given you enough to be dangerous? Yes, all right, so I will, have you given?
Yeah, all right, so I would like to ask a question, and then we can open it up to the group. And I think we've got enough time to have a pretty good discussion, but we do have a hard stop at 2 o'clock, so I just want to remind everyone of that. But I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on this innovation theme that this current administration has definitely prioritized, but in China's 13th five-year plan on energy and also on innovation, that it's very apparent that China is putting a lot of attention and money behind innovation. I saw, let me just see, that they're trying to boost science and technology spending to $41 billion with a B in 2016. And that R&D investment is expected to account for 2.5% of GDP by 2020. So clearly it's a big priority for the central government, and when it comes to, I guess, intellectual property and some of the investments that Chinese firms are making, I'm wondering if you think that all of these investments will pay off. Are they really going to become the new innovators, let's say in clean energy technology, or are they just buying up a lot of the current technology and maybe that doesn't necessarily translate to innovating the future technology?
I think it's going to be a mixture of those two, because but what it does, they have a big priority. I mean, China's energy portfolio is everything. Seriously, we have a little blog post coming in about they're partnering with Iceland on geothermal. Did you guys know Iceland is mainly geothermal? Okay, well, now some Chinese citizens say, yeah, but I mean, so that they, so that they're really interested, supporting, buying the technologies, but also supporting, the kind of the communication and partnerships. Like, now, it's probably in the next few years, it's going to expand more with the Europeans, for which, they're really happy. Yeah, but then that said, not all investment will go well, probably. I mean, because a lot of the big companies that do this are state-owned enterprises. And I mean, just look at the wind, my wind power, my garbage wind slide. That happened in great part because a lot of the wind companies are owned by state-owned enterprises. And they said, ooh, subsidies on wind, we will build wind turbines. And so they built all these farms and no one bothered to connect with it. And so there's kind of playing catch up with that. So there could be slippage.
Okay.
But that said, I think that, you know, but they're interested not just also in energy for China anymore, they're also looking to because they see, I think in some ways, the potential of the US retreating in terms of global clean energy markets. They're overjoyed, probably, that they want to invest more in having technologies that they can sell overseas. So you see, this happened even earlier. I've had people over the years, like some cleaner coal technology folks, like you know, gas capture and CCS, where I've had some speakers from US and Chinese companies come and talk, and they say, yeah, we're doing a test plant up in Pennsylvania, and I'm like, ooh, where else are you gonna do it? They're like, Eastern Europe, Latin America. So the idea is that sometimes you see US and Chinese and European companies that they'll do a pilot in one country, but they want to just go global with it. So I think it's seen as like the cash cow.
Okay, great. Well, let's open it up to other questions. Is anyone, any brave souls?
So, could you speak about the cap and trade program that the country is doing? The pilot programs are now going national, and that there's some flux in the sectors that it's going to cover, and then also how the allocation of permits might be politically influenced. Like the initial allocation, right? If you just give it to like your connected buddies, then it becomes a political game rather than an environmental.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely, it was quite exciting, you know, as part of, are you on the energy committee somewhere, or just?
The staffer for.
Okay, great. When US-China announced their climate agreement, one of the issues that Xi Jinping talked about and even, you know, made as part of this Paris Agreement, saying that we're gonna do this CO2 trade program. And there've been a number of pilots, and as you indicated, that a little bit of slippage, right? That it's not really markets yet, and sometimes the trading is for things that, you know, it's not necessarily encouraging new investments in clean energy, and so there's a lot of slippage. That said, there's a lot of pressure coming from above, but then that always worries me because, you know, as a China watcher for many years, that when there's a lot of pressure, there can be a lot of things made up at the local level. That said, you know, you do have a lot of, in some of these projects, there are a lot of international partners. I mean, the NRDC, environmental, EDF, Environmental Defense Fund, and others, WRI, and so the work that they're doing is, you know, trying to help promote transparency. And so I think it's overambitious that they're really gonna, I mean, the national one's supposed to be launched this year. I mean, I can't see it being successful. That said, I think part of it is that they put the pressure on the local governments, and that they're going to see what works, and then they'll go from there. It's just, you know, it's really like pushing the provinces over the cliff and say, do it, and then, but there is so much pressure from the central government now that officials are actually losing their jobs and not getting promotions if they don't meet the local pollution emission targets. And so the CO2 cap and trade has been linked quite tightly with the air pollution issue. And that even in the air pollution law that was revised about a year ago, they talk about clean energy. And so it's really, and even in the 13th five-year plan, and so there's a lot of redundancies at all the kind of legislative pit stops that you can go, so that the message is very clear to the local governments. And it can be an issue of capacity, but that's why I think that we're going to see a mixed bag. That in some of the places like in Shenzhen and Shanghai, that we're going to be more successful because you have a lot of the international partners helping, but it'll take time.
How should one, working for policymakers in the U.S. who are concerned about excess capacity, dumping of Chinese steel, aluminum, perhaps cement, how should one reconcile kind of the sense that there is overinvestment in certain manufacturing sectors in China that leads China to make a whole lot more of these products than they need or anybody around the world needs with these ambitious environmental goals that you put up.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, I think that, you know, what, you guys maybe know that there was last year, that we, you know, last 3 years, we've seen a drop in coal production in China. And they came down quite hard and said, saying steel production is, you know, we're turning off the tap, right? Because they're very energy intensive. But then the provinces, I mean, and you guys can all relate to this, the provinces were saying for the jobs, right? Closing coal mines, the coal mines were actually closed. In the past it used to be, we will close 1,000 coal mines, and then everyone closed them for 2 days, nothing was back up. But now coal mines were actually being closed. And then a lot of coal-fired power plants were actually being closed. And then the steel plants. And the provinces were starting to feel like we're going to have revolts. And so they very quietly started reopening. And so a lot of it too, it kind of shows you that in some ways the weakness of Beijing, but at the same time, Beijing understands. Another thing that's also a concern to me that, and I'll don't make sure I continue to answer your question, but do you guys ever hear of coal to chemicals, coal to liquids, coal to gas, probably coal to ice cream someday? Like, China's got a lot of coal, that as they have been turning down coal-fired power, we've seen the provinces start investing more in coal to gas, coal to liquids, liquids for all those cars that are coming on the street, gas for heating, and chemicals for just making stuff. And those are very energy intensive, incredibly CO2 intensive, and I as a water person am concerned because they're very water intensive. Under the 13th five-year plan, with the existing and the planned, these coal conversion industries, if they come to being, it will make up 10% of China's current CO2 emissions. Another case in point, maybe, you know, in terms of being a climate leader, but that said, it really boils down to jobs, which is why I'm going to start having more meetings talking about the coal transition. I had one on coal to chemicals recently, just that it's, in some ways, while China is there, it's being done at a scale that makes our heads hurt here in this country, but China and the US are facing a very similar problem in how to transition the coal industries. Because, I mean, I know that there's like a little blip up just recently with coal, but in general, the coal sector is on its way out. And, you know, apologies to people, you know, maybe not everyone agrees with that, but the numbers appear that the markets are saying we don't want it, particularly in the US. But in China, it's less of a, they're starting to get the price right on energy, you know, and then there's the political pressure. So the coal industry, we know it's on its way out, but how long it's going to take is a question. But so like with your steel question about that, in terms of China dumping steel,
Well,
I mean, there's a concern.
For purposes of this discussion, I'm more concerned with the excess capacity, the overinvestment manufacturing that takes place in China. How is that in line with the ambitious environmental goals that you've laid out?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, but I mean, what we're seeing is that, maybe to summarize, it's like whack-a-mole. It's like, I mean, the leadership is clear. They want to take care of the air pollution problem because the public dissatisfaction, the amount of protests that are happening around pollution, it's only growing. But they also see it as a reputational issue, that they're losing investment from abroad. But their ability to sometimes control the provinces